Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. I am off the mountain for the holidays. I am down toward the sand hills of North Carolina visiting family, which I always enjoy this time of year because of the food. Y'all know I like to eat. But this does tie into herbs a little bit because, I am an oyster fanatic. Really, any kind of fresh seafood. I love to fish. I love to crab. I love to gather seafood, cast netting for shrimp any way I can. Half of my childhood was near the coast. I was in the swamps of North Carolina, what we would call the low country. If we were in South Carolina, we just call it the swamps usually. But my maternal grandparents were from that area. They've been there. I guess my family's been in the low country of either North or South Carolina and a little bit into Virginia since the late 1600s. And we have such a tradition of seafood. I mentioned my grandfather before, what an amazing man he was. He wanted his family to have a beach house. So he was a farmer. He didn't have a lot of money. He was also a brick mason. He did a lot of different things. He went to what was at that time the poorest county in coastal North Carolina and bought two lots on the intercoastal waterway for hardly anything, built a house by hand on one. And when I say by hand, he literally also bought some timberland, set up his own sawmill, cut his own wood, cut his own boards, designed the entire house, drew the blueprints, every single thing other than probably the electric wiring and hooking up the city water, municipal water, he did by hand. Beautiful two-story old-fashioned beach house right on the intercoastal. And he sold that one and then built another one right beside it. So he built one, sold it to pay for both properties. So we were so blessed to have that beach house growing up. And he died of Lou Gehrig's disease when I was 10. But before then, he took me out on the water quite a bit, and he would show me how to take oysters and pop them open with a pocket knife and just eat them raw, when I was like 5 or 6 years old. So I grew up not only in the mountains, but also in the swamps and on the coast. And this time of year is oyster season. I went down, I got a bushel of oysters, and came back, and where I had put the oyster knives last year, someone had moved them. They were not where they were, and the person who moved them did not remember where they were. So after searching and searching and searching, I started trying to use various implements. By the way, if you don't have an oyster knife, a flathead screwdriver is probably your best bet. But like a moron, I grabbed a butter knife and um, tried to pop open an oyster. The first one went flying, half the shell with the oyster still attached to the sink. My dog Buddy enjoyed that one. He loves seafood, by the way. My dog is just incredibly Scottish in his taste. He's a little border collie, and that dog loves seafood. Well, the second one, I started prying it open. It slipped, and our subtidal oysters in North Carolina have a very elongated, razor sharp tip. So that went flying into my knife hand, the hand that was holding the knife. The two hands jammed together very hard, and that oyster shell cut me down to the bone. Sliced my hand open. It immediately started bleeding. Pine pitch to the rescue again. I mentioned before what a wonderful herb the resin of pine is. Like basically where a pine tree is wounded, that sap starts to come out, and that's how the tree closes its own wound. Okay, we usually collect it at sort of the gummy, sticky stage, which is great for fresh wounds, or at the dried stage, which is actually better as a styptic, which means it stops bleeding. So I grabbed some dried pine pitch, crushed it fine. It's very fine when it's crushed. Put it directly into the wound. Pine is antiseptic and also helps stop bleeding. And applied pressure. And within 15 minutes, it stopped bleeding. And I put a little bandage over it. And by the next morning, it closed up entirely. I mean, I'm sitting here, I can still see a little bit of a scab, but this was this was a wound that most people would have gone to the emergency room and sat there for 16 hours waiting for it to be stitched up as they bled all over the place. Pine pitch to the rescue again. And if there's one thing we have in North Carolina, it is pine trees. My gosh, do we have pine trees. Let's get into today's show because, I mentioned last week when I came on, I was a little hoarse. And it was just a change in weather. I had gone from 5,000 feet elevation and 26 degrees with wind down to the coastal and central parts of North Carolina. I mentioned I grew up kind of halftime at the coast, where the swamps really. The town I grew up in was actually 7 feet below sea level. So that's a pretty dramatic change. Well, when I got down here, it was 70 degrees. I had gone from 26 degrees, cold, dry air at 5,000 feet to, sea level, below sea level, and 70 degrees. And so, of course, I got a little sore throat and I got a little hoarse. Well, in my book, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People, I have a whole chapter on sore throats. So, following last week's discussion on herbs for lung issues, I thought, hey, let's just go ahead and do the chapter on herbs for sore throat. Before I get into it, I want to remind you we are just, 2 weeks till Christmas. And my books make excellent Christmas gifts. So if you buy them off Amazon, you can get them as paperback. Look for my name, Judson Carroll. I'm the Judson Carroll that writes the herb books, not the Judson Carroll that writes about colonial history. That seems to be a distant cousin, probably. Who knows, right? Um, when your family's been in the original colonies of America as long as mine have, I just claim kin to everybody. Irish, French, English, white, black, a Native American, I'm related to everybody. I just claim kin to them all. When someone says, wasn't your grandfather or your grandmother so and so? I say, yeah, we're probably cousins, the way it works. My books will be under Judson Carroll, and the titles so far are The Herbs and Weeds of Father Johann Kunzel, The Medicinal Trees of the American South, and Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People. And pretty soon I'm going to have an announcement about the next book. I actually finished the last chapter 2 days ago. This is going to be a great book. I'm really excited about it. I think I'll be rolling it out the first week of January. Let's get past New Year's, everybody recover from the holidays and the parties, and then it's time to start taking some herbs and learning I'll give you a hint, so the history and practice of Christian herbal medicine. If anyone's ever asked you, is herbal medicine Christian? Well, not only, are herbs made by God available to all people, but herbal medicine has a fascinating history associated with Christianity. Literally, all of the hospitals in Western Europe and beyond, really, for about 1,500 years, were run by monks and nuns who treated people with only herbs and, basic surgical procedures. The herbal medicine that we inherited from the Greeks and the Romans was vastly developed by Benedictines, and then we move throughout the ages. I talk about the British herbalists of the 15 and 1600s. We get into German folk medicine, which really picks up like just say mid 1800s into the early 1900s. So much good stuff. I talk about old Samuel Thompson and Jethro Kloss. I mean, some of the American um, strongly, adamantly Christian herbal practitioners. So when someone says to you, no, well, our herbs just a bunch of like new age nonsense. No, actually, the history of herbal medicine goes back to prehistory. I mean, obviously, there was a strong Jewish tradition of herbal medicine before Christianity. There's been a strong Christian tradition of herbal medicine throughout the centuries. And, it's not just a book of history. It talks all about herbs and their uses. It talks about the interesting characters that develop different schools of herbal medicine. You'll learn about visionary saints and rebels and, just oddballs and brilliant geniuses. And it's full of remedies and history and interesting stories. And I hope it's going to be well received. Obviously, it's not going to be a book that's going to find a lot of appeal among the more progressive, new age herbalists. I'm hoping it's going to be a book that a lot of Christians will find valuable to use in their own homes for their own home medicine and to share with friends and family. And when someone says, are you sure that's not, witchcraft or something? You can say, look, this is the history and development of herbal medicine from the time before Christ to the present day as practiced by devout, outspoken Christians. And I think it'll clear up a lot of confusion. I tried in this book very much to not only lay out the history and the facts, which I would say are directed toward the head, also to lay out some theological concepts, hit the heart as well as the head. So it's an interesting book. I think it's going to be a fun read, and I'll be really excited to announce this one in a couple of weeks. So think of this as sort of the teaser. That's the teaser for this one. But let's get into this week's show. Let's talk about herbs for sore throat. First glance, you may not consider a sore throat an emergency or first aid type of condition. However, sore throat can be deadly, whether viral or bacterial, or even caused by severe allergies. If a sore throat is ignored and allowed to go on too long, the tissue can become boggy. That means the inflammation has been in place long enough that the tissue is swollen, filled with fluid, and has lost its elasticity. This condition is often evidenced by a purple tinge to the tissue. When this happens, a simple sore throat can quickly become a condition that cuts off one's ability to breathe. Infection of the throat can become an emergency even more quickly. There are two priorities in treating a sore throat: preventing infection and reducing inflammation. In treating a sore throat using herbs, the pain and discomfort is also addressed. What is not a good idea is the very thing promoted by most over the counter, officially approved remedies, simply numbing the throat for the sake of comfort. The primary home remedy that my mother and grandmother always recommended was gargling with salted water. This simple remedy was often quite effective. The strong salt solution was both antibacterial and astringent. It was just hot water in which as much salt had been stirred into until no more would dissolve, then cooled enough to be tolerable. Iodized table salt also has some antiseptic components, so it's good to use. It's one of the few times I really recommend using iodized table salt. This is especially effective early on at the first stage of a sore throat. The primary herbs I use for a sore throat begin with the trees, pine and oak. Good old pine again. But that's exactly what Father Nape recommended in his classic work, My Water Cure. He said young bark of oak boiled for about a half an hour gives a sanative decoction, that means disinfectant. Small towel is dipped into it and tied as a bandage around the neck. Such bandages give great help to people afflicted with thick throats, being swollen and probably a little congested too. Complaints of the glands are removed just as thoroughly by these bandages. Now, I would use it as a gargle as well as a compress on the outside. Father Nape was referring to using the bark as a decoction, a poultice, or a wash. But I think the combination with the gargle to get the antiseptic and astringent properties of the oak is really one of our most astringent plants. Oak galls, which are actually little wasp nests in the bark, used to be used for tanning leather. It's so astringent, you would be amazed the effectiveness of using oak for sore throat or diarrhea or many things. And it's not unpleasant. I mean, you can make a little tea of oak bark. You usually want to take it off a limb so you don't kill the tree. Just boil it down, cool it, and you can sip on it just a little at a time for even really severe diarrhea, or use it as a gargle for the throat, for a sore throat. He also recommended fenugreek. Fenugreek was we find in the spice section of your grocery store. It's used in some Middle Eastern dishes. It's just little seeds. He said it worked as a cooling remedy in fever and in throat complaints. With great heat in the throat, the tea affords a good gargle. A teaspoon of the powder, he's talking about powdered seeds, is sufficient for a middle-sized cup of tea, which is either drunk or used as a gargle during the day, every hour or oftener, one spoonful at a time. Mallow is very soothing to the throat, and for many, just any inflamed condition, mallow just really calms things, whether inside or out. He said mallow blossoms, especially those of the black mallow, prepared as a tea, cure throat infirmities and loosen the phlegm of the chest. These blossoms are generally mixed with those of mullein. And of course, mullein, we talked last week, for lung issues. He said the blossoms of mullein or wallflower, which is a nice name for it, are carefully gathered by country people. They know that they are very effective in wintertime as a gargle and produce a still more effective tea for complaints of the throat, catarrhs, that's congestion, phlegm on the chest, and for difficult breathing. And let's see, sage, this is garden sage, Salvia officinalis. Sage tea will remove phlegm from the palate, throat, or stomach. Violet, violet again, we've mentioned several times. For a swollen throat, this tea is a tested gargle. At the same time, the throat bandage may be applied dipped into decoction of violet tea and soaked pure water. Those who suffer from difficulty in breathing, which, however, is more the result of gathered gases and morbid matter in the stomach and bowels, should undertake a little course of violet tea. They should drink it daily for some time, 2 or larger small cups of this tea. Father Kunzel recommended several herbs for sore throat, including cranesbill, which we discussed before, this geranium, and other geraniums. Uh, they are nice, mild astringents. The cranesbill geranium, wild geranium, even the geranium in the pot. A tea of that is a wonderful astringent. It can be used in so many conditions, from sore throats to inflamed eyes to, again, diarrhea and all kinds of things, inflamed skin. Geraniums are really nice to have around. Goldenrod, the plant that many people mistakenly blame for their allergies, actually caused by ragweed. Goldenrod is a nice astringent. Father Kunzel said, you will find this perennial, often a meter-high plant with yellow flowers in deforested places, berry places, he means where you might gather blackberries, and along roadsides. It rightly deserves to be named goldenrod. Internally, one uses the tea for croup, sore throat, bladder ailments, light diarrhea, sleeplessness, but for the internal use, one should always add the same amount of juniper berries or common centaury. Take a half cup 3 to 5 times a day. The soaked dry herb is also used as poultices for the same disease as external. A lot of people like goldenrod in their cold remedies. It has a good effect not just on sore throats, but it also has a mild antiviral effect. It has a mild help with fevers and aches and pains. It's a good herb. It's a very good herb. Chickweed is Stellaria. It's just a little low-growing herb. We often think of it more in terms of foraging, eating as green. But externally, it's often been used as a poultice for inflamed glands in the throat, throat swelling, also for pneumonia, liver inflammation, inflamed feet. It's a nice soothing herb. Other herbs mentioned by Father Kunzel that are good for sore throat include pimpinella, St. Benedict's herb or wood avens, plantain, ground elder, poplar, and linden. Again, we're talking mild astringents, basically. Maria Trebin recommended agrimony especially. She said, agrimony has great healing properties for inflammation of the throat and mouth. Remember this in cases of tonsillitis, throat disorders, thrush, or inflammation of the mucous membranes of the mouth. Gargling with this tea clears the voice for singers and for public speakers. She also recommended mallow. She recommended mallow as a tea, sipping 4 cups per day, just a couple sips, probably every 15 minutes, and using it as a gargle. Walnut. Walnut is a wonderfully astringent herb that has some antimicrobial properties, good to help prevent the inflammation. She said baths and washings enriched with this decoction are good for acne, festering eczema, sweaty feet, and leukorrhea. As a mouthwash, it is used for inflamed gums, throat, and larynx. Walnut's been an old family remedy around here as long as, well, anybody can remember. It's used for everything for from worms and scabies to as an internal astringent for all the properties mentioned. Swedish bitters, of course. Maria Trevin would always recommend Swedish bitters, and Swedish bitters are indeed what I used last week for my sore throat. Swedish bitters have so many good herbs in there that are good for clearing the mucus and for reducing inflammation. She said that if the throat is hotter and inflamed, so that food is only swallowed with difficulty, drops of Swedish bitters are swallowed slowly morning, noon, and evening. They take away the heat and heal the throat. She also recommended sage, uses a tea and a gargle. She also mentions that it's good for receding gums, loose and bleeding teeth, a lot of throat and mouth disorders, for toothaches and other things. She would recommend soaking a piece of cotton or some other cloth in the tea and keeping it in the mouth against the affected area. Bed straw, which is gallium. She says gargle with bed straw tea several times daily. Now, other herbs that are used in folk tradition, especially in my area, but really throughout North America, false lily of the valley. Now, this is not regular lily of the valley, okay? It's also not Canada moonseed. True lily of the valley has a digitalis-like effect on the heart. Could be extremely dangerous in large doses, usually fairly safe in small doses, much safer than using foxglove as a natural digitalis. But we're not talking about that plant. We're also not talking about Canada moonseed, which can look a little bit like wild grapes. Okay, Canada moonseed is very poisonous. But Native Americans used the tea of false lily of the valley as a gargle for sore throats. That's Canada Mayflower. Okay, that's wherein the confusion lies. The plant does not look like Canada moonseed, but because it's called Canada Mayflower, there's been some confusion. So we're talking false lily of the valley, Canada Mayflower. Toothwort is just an old standby. Toothwort, I think it's actually named toothwort because of the shape of the leaves, if I remember correctly, but it's used for all throat and mouth issues, from toothaches to as a gargle for sore throat, or ulcers in the mouth, for those little acid bumps you get, anything, any puffy gums, you know, sort of a doctor of signatures type thing, and a go-to for centuries. Common strawberry. Now, this is just regular old strawberry. We usually don't want to use the commercially grown strawberries because they are really soaked in pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers. But wild strawberry is very easy to recognize. The only real lookalike for it is false wild strawberry, which just doesn't taste good. It's not going to hurt you. It, who knows? Maybe it could be toxic in huge amounts, but I've probably eaten handfuls of false wild strawberry, just looking down thinking, oh, strawberry, I picked it up and ate it, and when I was younger especially. But wild strawberries, the leaf is used as an astringent, as a tea for sore throats. Shin leaf, that's Pyrola elliptica, is leaf tea gargled for sore throats. Twin leaf, that's Jeffersonia. What a really interesting plant this is. It's one of those New World plants. It's just a really cool, like kind of low mountain Appalachian rolling hills area, Shenandoah Valley area. You're going to see it. Pretty little plant. The root tea gargled for sore throats. Sweet Cicely has a long history in America and in Europe. Root chewed, or a tea made from the root, is a gargle for sore throat. All right, mints, the whole family. Mints are pretty much good for everything, it seems. The mints are slightly astringent, they're antimicrobial, they really help prevent a throat infection and soothe the throat. They have a slight numbing effect. Wonderful to have as many varieties of mints growing in your garden as you can. And a lot of people say that garden mints are stronger. I tend to find the wild mint stronger. It may just be because of where I live. But the wild spearmint that grows around here, there's so many varieties of mint. The apple mint is very mild. That's one of our mountain mints. It's very pleasant. But any of the mint family, just always remember to be careful with like essential oils of mint or taking huge amounts of mint. They can cause miscarriage. They can cause all kinds of, well, really pretty bad stuff if you have it in too concentrated form and too much. Pennyroyal is a member of the mint family, and the one documented case of someone dying from herbal home remedies was a lady maybe 100 years or so ago who tried to take, I believe it was essential oil of pennyroyal to induce an abortion. Well, she was successful in that. She also killed herself, bleeding from every orifice in her body. You know, horrible way that two people died because of a misguided notion about how to use an herb. Herbs are generally, in their natural form, fairly safe as long as they're not poisonous plants. When you start isolating those compounds and concentrating those compounds in a way that, God never intended to appear in nature, a otherwise very safe and commonly used plant like even mint, um, even raspberry leaf, I mean, just really mild things could certainly have bad effects. So remember that. But otherwise, mint, all the mints, very good for sore throat, very good for any of these conditions. Also great for colds, flus, wonderful stuff. Licorice, you know, licorice is just great. I mean, licorice has a long use for coughs and sore throats. It's very good for the lungs, throat, and kidneys. And we've talked about it as antiviral in about two issues of the podcast ago. But remember, licorice, small amounts for short periods, and in some people can raise blood pressure. So always be careful. Licorice is again an herb that is so used throughout history, made into candies that kids eat and everything. But huge amounts or taken for long periods of time can be really, really detrimental. I mean, you can really do yourself some harm with liquor in too high an amount. Early everlasting is great astringent. It's also slightly sedative. It can be used for tea, sore throats, and as expectorant, and for calming coughs. I think I mentioned this one in our last week's show on herbs for the lungs. If not, I certainly should have, because it's one of those that's been used for the lungs and throat for centuries. Sweet everlasting is also called rabbit tobacco. You may have heard of this. Even in my uncle's time, he was born in the late 40s. He had the same inherited asthma I have. The doctors prescribed that he smoke rabbit tobacco as a child, and it really helped. That is actually a hard one to pronounce, the Latin name. It is Nephalium obtusifolium. I'm going to go with that as a pronunciation. It's Gnaphalium. So Nephalium obtusifolium. It has a long folk use for asthma and also as an alternative to tobacco or as an addition to tobacco. A lot of people used to smoke herbal blends of tobacco, much better for you than certainly the commercial cigarettes on the market today. But there were all kinds of herbal tobaccos that were very popular and used medicinally as well as for pleasure of smoking. It can also be chewed or used in a tea for sore throat. It's mildly sedative, antispasmodic, astringent and soothing, and expectorant, and may have some antiviral properties. It's pretty popular as an antiviral in the herbal tradition of the Southern Appalachians. So, check into that one. That's a good one to have on hand for several issues. Wood sorrel. Wood sorrel are the shamrocks, They are oxalis. They're sour. They are astringent. Folk use for sore throat, likely because of the astringent properties associated with the sourness. They have the oxalic acid, which makes them a very nice little side dish or a seasoning. Even I like to have them with my fish when I'm out in the woods foraging. I use them in place of lemon. When you have too much of anything with oxalic acid in it, it can cause you some trouble. A little bit here and there. The sorrels have been eaten by humans for as long as humans have been on the earth, okay? The fresh plant of this one is simply chewed and the juice swallowed. Sheep sorrel is one that grows so commonly where I grew up, and I would use it that way. I would just chew up the stems and the leaves, and suck on it and swallow the sour juice. I loved it. I was a sheep sorrel fanatic when I was a kid. Cinquefoil is potentilla. It's a nice astringent, very useful for sore throats and anything where you may want an astringent. Frostweed is Helianthus canadensis, a strong tea used for sore throat, swollen glands, and throat infections. Profoliate bellwort is a plant that was used by Native Americans as a tea for sore throats. They use the root. Wild oats. Wild oats have been used throughout the Americas and Europe, surely in Asia, all over the world. But for sore throat, you make a tea from the roots. Golden corydalis. Although toxic in even moderate doses, this plant has been used for sore throats and is used for many conditions in traditional Chinese medicine. So let's put a big asterisk beside that one. Unless you are consulting a TCM doctor or some really good texts on traditional Chinese medicine, probably want to leave that one alone. But echinacea is ubiquitous, and I mean it's everywhere. I just say echinacea, of course. Echinacea is good for most anything that requires an immune system response and also helps with inflammation. Now the ferns, again, these are a little controversial. Common polypody fern has been used in folk medicine for sore throat. So has Venus maidenhair fern. I love using the ferns for their herbal properties. There's always a warning on them that some ferns are slightly carcinogenic. Actually, if you look up the Wikipedia entry on eclectic medicine, Wikipedia hates herbal medicine. Let me just put it that way. They call it pseudoscience. But they actually have a very respectful entry on Samuel Thompson, but a not so respectful entry on the closely related eclectic school of herbal medicine. And they actually say that the founder was essentially, let me think, Constantine Samuel Rafinescu. Yes, Rafinescu. He was a Frenchman. I think he was actually born in America, educated in France, came back, self-educated. Um, Pretty brilliant guy. I mean, he spoke many languages, very interested in botany. He was a contemporary of Audubon. He combined Native American herbal medicine with the European tradition and sort of the folk medicine of the early American colonies. And, he wasn't always right about everything, as none of us are, obviously. I don't care if you have a doctor or PhD beside your name, MD or PhD beside your name. You're probably not any more right about something than the, barely educated mechanic down the street is on a different subject. Everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. I certainly don't claim to know everything. Unlike Dr. Fauci, I don't say I am science. I am just a guy who studies herbs, as I always say. I welcome people questioning me, unlike people that tend to have MDs and PhDs beside their names. Wonder why that is, huh? Well, anyway, he came up with this really comprehensive materia medica of medicinal herbs, many of which he learned from Native American sources or secondarily from Native Americans that should have revolutionized medicine. This was right at the beginning of the time when the medical industry and government bureaucracy was really trying to push herbs out. Well, I guess some of that sentiment is kind of reflected in Wikipedia because they mention that he died of liver cancer and they say it was probably due to a fern he had used. They don't know that. I don't know that. Nobody knows that because there was not a documentation of that or any kind of autopsy or who knows what. The man died of liver cancer, and that's that. Now, did he recommend using maidenhair fern? Yes, he absolutely did. Just can many ferns be carcinogenic? Yes, they absolutely can. But did he take it regularly enough in high enough doses to cause his liver cancer? Absolutely no idea. And neither does anybody else, and that's the point. So I do use ferns medicinally. Sometimes I use certain ferns internally that do not. appear to have any carcinogenic effect or only have a carcinogenic effect in very large doses over a long-term period. Other times I use ferns only externally. And so I'm going to tell you, do your own research and make your own decisions about that. But two ferns that have been found useful for sore throat are common polypody fern and Venus maidenhair fern as a gargle. So not even really swallowing it. I'm putting this out there as a disclaimer or as a caution to do your own research, right? Beyond that, we have Asiatic dayflower, a tea made of the leaves, gargled, used for sore throat and tonsillitis. Alum root, that is a primary. I probably should have started off with alum root. That's well, as the name implies, it's as stringent as alum. Okay, if you've ever used alum in making pickles and canning and everything, you know alum will pucker those lips like nothing else, like only a unripe persimmon can do, which is also fairly good for sore throats. Persimmons are really good. But alum root is very astringent, used as a gargle for sore throats. Ditch stonecrop, a tincture of that is used for tonsillitis or has been used traditionally. And prickly ash, Xylem. The berry and teas use sore throat and tonsillitis. That's another one that people caution against. So, but again, we're looking at prickly ash more as a gargle and, maybe as a compress around the throat, around swollen glands. So, y'all, that pretty much wraps it up for this week. I think we've covered a lot of information, but it's not too overwhelming. I will put the show notes on my blog. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas. Christmas is my favorite time of year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Eat some good food. Enjoy spending time with your family while you have them. Trust me, as someone who does not have much family left, I really appreciate uh, maybe things other people take for granted. So try not to take things for granted, especially if you have kids. There's nothing more important than being a good father or a good mother, or a good grandfather or a good grandmother. Have a great week. And hey, like I said, my books make wonderful Christmas gifts. Don't forget, the paperback is available on Amazon. The Kindle version is available on Amazon, but the ebooks are available off of my blog, southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com. Y'all have a great one, and I'll see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.